It began with a flake, one tiny curl of beige paint coiled away from the living room wall like a dying insect, spinning gently in the still air before landing face down on the floor. I watched it fall. I had been staring at that wall for 47 minutes already, not because it was beautiful, God, no, but because there was something about it that refused to settle. It pulsed, it breathed, and now it peeled. Humidity, I said aloud, as if my voice could explain things I didn't understand. But the air was dry, the kind of dry you only get after 3 years of no guests, no change, and no purpose. I leaned closer to the wall. The spot where the paint had peeled looked darker than it should have. Not just exposed plaster. No, this was deeper. Organic, almost. Like the wall had a wound. I reached out. My fingertip hovered an inch from the surface when the second flake dropped. And then the third. And then the entire wall exhaled, audibly. The sound was papery and wet, like someone folding a letter with greasy hands. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." But yes, 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 yes. The paint began to unfurl itself in slow motion, one strip at a time, like ancient scrolls revealing themselves to an illiterate man who dared to live in ignorance. I sat down on the couch and stared, too afraid to move, too ashamed to look away. Beneath the peeling layers, something was being written. Not painted, not etched. Written. The letters formed slowly, backwards at first, like the wall was unsure if I was worthy of understanding. I blinked, and the first full word arrived. Why? I stood up involuntarily. My knees cracked. My back screamed. What? I asked, genuinely. The wall said nothing. It just peeled another strip, revealing the second word, did. The third came faster. You. And then, with the sound of 1,000 paper cuts happening inside my soul. Stay. Stay? I whispered. I live here. The wall seemed unimpressed. It peeled a jagged corner, revealing something in red, not paint. No, this was too slick, too intentional. It bled the next word. Again. I backed away. My hands trembled. I hadn't slept well in weeks, but hallucinations weren't on the menu. The wall was asking questions, and worse, it knew the answers. I didn't have a choice, I said. It's cheap rent. The neighbors are quiet. The fridge doesn't leak anymore. Another peel, faster now. The paint shed like skin in a fever, falling in spirals, fluttering onto the floor where it began to rearrange itself into sentences. The wall spelled it out in jagged, sorrowful lines. She warned you. I choked. My breath caught, because she had. That strange woman who lived here before me. The one who disappeared. The one whose mail I still get. She left a note in the kitchen drawer. Don't feed the wall. Don't stare too long. It remembers. I thought she was nuts. I laughed. Then I unpacked my boxes and painted over everything. Everything. Including what she wrote on the wall in Sharpie. It had bled through the first coat, so I added a second. Then a third. And now it was coming back. The wall peeled faster, like it was waking up, like it had waited too long to be seen. The message spread. Not just letters now, shapes, diagrams, symbols. A crude drawing of a door with no knob. A circle within a triangle within an eye. My own face. Yes, my face. Scratched into the plaster with stunning clarity. I was screaming in it. What do you want? I begged. Another strip dropped. The message beneath read, to be heard. The lights flickered. My television turned on, static only. But the static moved in rhythm with the words on the wall, pulsing with every new peel, forming a language I had never studied but somehow understood. It wasn't just words. It was a scream, translated into shape and shadow. I crawled forward on my hands and knees, fingers grazing the dust and paint flakes like a worshiper sorting through ash. I'm sorry, I whispered. I shouldn't have painted over you. The wall shivered. A single flake floated into my lap, warm to the touch, almost like breath. It read, then undo it, and the peeling accelerated. Now the wall shed like a snake, desperate to escape its own history. Beneath the paint, more words began to form, but I could tell they were just the beginning. This wasn't a sentence. This was a letter written to me, or maybe to everyone who'd ever lived here, maybe to no one. The wall had 43 minutes left, and I knew, somewhere in my bones, in my teeth, in my marrow, that it had something to say, something final, something I had covered with 3 coats of denial. I sat down, and I listened. Minute 2 passed like molasses poured over dread. The wall had become a living document, each layer of paint sliding off in strips that curled and whispered mid-air before crumpling onto the floor in patterns I didn't yet understand, but couldn't ignore. More words bled through now, less linear, more desperate, arranged in a chaos that felt rehearsed. Doors are lies, one strip read. Another curled across the ceiling and spelled, "Your exit is inward." My breath caught. "You're not making sense," I said, but my voice was no longer confident. It was the kind of voice you hear from someone who just realized the kitchen clock has been ticking backward for years. The wall began to crack, not violently, but surgically, as if it had been waiting for my confusion to reach a precise temperature before it revealed the next layer of horror. Through the widening fissures, I saw not insulation or wiring, but paper. Endless folds of yellowing parchment stuffed behind drywall, like lungs made of forgotten warnings. A piece slipped through one of the cracks and drifted down, gently landing against my ankle. I picked it up. On it was a charcoal drawing of a man with no mouth standing in front of a wall, bleeding words. Underneath, "The ones who deny me speak without faces." I dropped it. "What do you want from me?" I asked again, this time more fragile, like the answer might already be forming behind my eyes. The wall responded by peeling a large vertical swath from floor to ceiling. It came off in one single agonizing motion, like a zipper pulled down the spine of reason. Behind it, the message was carved into the plaster, not written, not painted, carved, deep, erratic grooves that formed 3 unmistakable words. "We were here." I staggered backward. "Who's we?" The wall moaned. Not metaphorically. The structure produced an actual sound, low and guttural, like plaster remembering pain. Then more paint came loose, not from the wall, but from the ceiling, cascading down like snowfall made of guilt and primer. Every flake that landed whispered, individually, in languages not meant for hearing. I cupped one in my hand, and it vibrated against my palm with a single message. "There were names before yours." I knew that. Of course I knew that. But it felt different now. My lease agreement had come with names blacked out. I assumed privacy laws. I assumed bureaucracy. But the wall had its own records, and it was tired of keeping them secret. The layers continued to fall, and beneath them, the shapes began to appear. Not words. Not now. Faces. Faces in the plaster, pressed outward, screaming silently. Mouths open mid-peel, their contours warped by years of being buried under beige and false normalcy. I recognized one of them, the woman who lived here before me. I had seen her photo once, tucked inside the last bill she never paid. Her name was Danielle. Her plaster mouth was wide open now, her wall eyes pleading. "Why didn't you listen to her?" the wall asked. She left the drawer open. "I thought she was crazy," I whispered. "We all did." "That's how we win," the wall replied. "We smother the prophets in drywall and paint them neutral." "This isn't real," I muttered, though I no longer believed it. I stumbled toward the wall, touched the surface. It pulsed beneath my hand. Warm, alive. This house was built on denial, the wall continued. Every layer a lie, every coat a memory painted over. "You added 3 more. Because I wanted peace," I said. "I wanted silence." "Then you shouldn't have stared." That line hit harder than I wanted it to, because it was true. I had spent hours, days staring at that wall, noticing how it always seemed slightly different in the evening, how it pulsed near midnight, how sometimes I'd hear words between the cracks of silence, words that weren't mine but tasted familiar. The paint dropped faster now, frenzied. It no longer drifted. It dove, leapt off the surface in clumps, taking the illusion with it. My whole apartment was shedding, not just the walls, the cabinets, the floor. Even the refrigerator began to lose its color, as if my entire reality was coated in something false. The wall produced a final strip, large, heavy, soaked in something too dark to be paint. It slapped against the floor in front of me. I picked it up, hands shaking. It read, "You will be the last coat." "No," I whispered. "No, I'm not staying." The wall shook. A deep tremor ran through the floor, subtle but deliberate. "That's not your choice anymore." I turned toward the front door. It was gone, not blocked. Gone. In its place, smooth drywall, fresh, white, still wet. 40 minutes left, the wall whispered, and I've only just begun. The front door was gone, smothered under a seamless new layer of wall that hadn't existed 10 minutes ago. It was smooth and wet to the touch, like the skin of something just born and already furious. I pressed my hand against it and felt resistance, not like wood or steel, but like memory pushing back. A low hum filled the apartment now, resonating from the very core of the building, like every floorboard and screw had decided to harmonize in dread. "You can't do this," I whispered, not even sure who I was speaking to anymore. The wall pulsed. A new flake fell beside my feet, curling upward like a beckoning finger. It read, "Denial is a choice. You made it 3 times." I backed away from the sealed doorway, turned, and stared into the center of the room where the largest strip of paint yet had just torn free on its own. It revealed a mural, a massive, grotesque mural hidden beneath layers of anonymity. It depicted a living room, my living room, but darker. The walls in the image were cracking open. A man, me, stood in the center, his skin beginning to peel away like paint, and above him, hovering where my ceiling fan should be, was a shape. Not a figure, a shape, something triangular, ancient, hovering, exhaling heat through unseen mouths. And beneath the mural, etched in crude symbols, the phrase, "It sees you when you renovate." My knees buckled. I crawled backward, my hand catching on another flake of peeling truth. "Why do you erase us?" it asked. "I didn't know," I screamed. "I didn't know you were still here." "We never left," the ceiling answered, and I looked up. The ceiling had split open in 5 lines, jagged like a pentagram trying to tear its way into relevance. Each edge dripped paint, thick, yellowing, regret-colored paint, onto my couch, my rug, my memories. I covered my ears. The sound was unbearable now, like drywall sobbing in frequencies that only guilt can hear. The message was still writing itself. The wall had abandoned language altogether. Now it carved feelings. Across the surface, new textures emerged. Sections of blistered paint bubbled in emotional topography. Shame, betrayal, implicit comfort. I touched one. My vision blurred. In an instant, I was standing in the same apartment. But not now. Then, years ago. A family lived here. A woman, 2 children. The man, her partner, screamed in silence, only his gestures visible, his mouth sealed shut. The children huddled in the corner, covering their ears from a sound that wasn't audible but felt. The mother stared at the wall. This wall. She mouthed something. "Don't paint it, please." And just as quickly, I snapped back to now. "Who were they?" I asked. The wall flaked a piece of itself onto the floor. It read, "Previous coats." My mouth dried. "You absorb us," I whispered. "You trap us in layers." "We offer a surface," the wall replied. "You apply the lie." The mural bled further down now, curling toward the floorboards, which had begun to split and warp into characters. words written in wood grain. They formed questions. Do you think this was yours? And when did you claim the right to cover history? I didn't answer, because I didn't know, because I had bought this apartment cheap, because I had seen the warning signs, and I had said, well, it just needs a fresh coat. The wall peeled faster, now shedding in loud rips like skin tearing itself away from shame. Dust filled the air, but it wasn't like normal dust. It tasted like lost things, like names you forget the moment someone introduces themselves. I coughed. My lungs felt coated. Inside my ears, a frequency had started pulsing. Low, then higher still, until it stopped abruptly. And in that silence, the wall revealed the sentence that made me fall to my knees. You are next. Next for what? I begged. To be remembered, the baseboards whispered. To be layered, the light switch added. To be covered, said the corner of the room where my cat used to sleep before she vanished without a trace 2 weeks ago. I looked around. All furniture had faded. Not disappeared, faded, as though the wall was rewriting what belonged to the space, and I was losing the vote. I turned in a circle. The kitchen doorway now led to more wall. My bedroom, gone. Just another sealed surface, slightly breathing. The apartment was shrinking, but not in size, in options. The more it spoke, the fewer exits remained. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. One notification. Update available. Wall. I dropped it. A new message formed on the biggest section of the wall yet. This one I didn't need to read aloud. It read, 27 minutes remain. I understood now. The message wasn't just being revealed. It was being written live, in real time, by the wall. To me, about what I was becoming. I was no longer a tenant. I was a canvas. 26 minutes left, and the air was thick with the scent of primer and prophecy. My skin itched. Not in the way dry skin itches, but like it was preparing to be removed, layered, repurposed. I could feel the wall's breath now. Yes, breath, slow and rhythmic, exhaling through every flake that fell, as if it had lungs made of plaster and history. More messages revealed themselves, overlapping, contradicting, as if the wall couldn't decide which version of the truth to show first. One strip read, "This is where you forgot who you were." Another just said, "Stand still." I didn't. I couldn't. My legs moved without my input, pacing small loops in a room that was becoming increasingly circular. The corners had begun to round, subtly at first, but now, clearly, geometry uncoiling itself like a trap. I grabbed a lamp, threw it at the wall. It bounced back and shattered mid-air, disintegrating into dust shaped like letters. The fragments landed and arranged themselves before my feet. Violence feeds us. "I want out," I said. I didn't ask to be here. The light fixture above sparked. The wall responded, "You came voluntarily. You chose to rest your head here. You signed the lease." "A lease isn't consent for possession," I snapped, unsure if I was still making legal sense or if that mattered anymore. The wall peeled a layer with a laugh. Yes, a laugh. The sound of thousands of paint chips giggling in unison, dry and unnerving. Then another strip came loose, a large one. It exposed not a message, but a mirror. Not my mirror, not reflective. This mirror showed rooms before mine. Old rooms, candlelit rooms, rooms where people knelt in front of the wall and prayed not to be remembered. I saw a child scratching warnings in chalk. I saw someone erasing them with sandpaper. I saw a woman standing still for days, her eyes wide, waiting for the message to finish writing. Then I saw her disappear, mid-breath, mid-thought. The wall sealed itself where she stood. "What do you do to them?" I asked. The peeling slowed. The next message was slow to arrive, dragging each letter out like an execution. "We translate them." Into what? Into us. My heart kicked against my ribs. I reached for the thermostat. It spun wildly on its own, then stopped at 666 degrees. I laughed, dry and cracked. Cliché, I muttered. The wall responded immediately with a message written in wet crimson. Clichés survive. The windows rattled. I ran to them, except there were no windows, just the illusion of them. What I thought were blinds were now stripes of false paint. What I thought was glass was now wall. Everything was wall. I screamed. It sounded like drywall being sawed in half. The floor pulsed, and new messages began to crawl up through the hardwood, splitting the panels. If you leave now, you will never be whole. If you stay, you will never be yourself. Choose the crack or the coat. My hands trembled. The walls pulsed again. Then more faces emerged. Not like before. These weren't sad or pleading. They were smiling. The smiles were wrong, asymmetrical, painted on. They whispered in unison, "Join us in the finish." "I won't," I said. "I won't be another layer." "You already are," they whispered. The wall behind me split open slightly, revealing not a secret room, but a shape, a silhouette of me, outlined in crumbling white. It was hollow, waiting. The outline was exact, my height, my stance. It even had the same scar on the left side of the neck that I got in 3rd grade from trying to kiss a dog that didn't want to be kissed. "Step in," the wall said, "and your confusion will end." I stepped back. My heel hit something. I turned. There, on the floor, was the first chip of paint that fell hours ago. It had changed. Now, it read, "The end was the beginning. This isn't about me," I muttered. "It never was. You've been doing this long before I arrived." "Yes," the walls sang, "but you're the first to ask why." "And what's the answer?" I shouted. "Why reveal any of this?" The wall peeled one last time in that moment. A massive vertical strip that split the message down the center of the room. Beneath it, etched in something deeper than paint, written in strokes that looked like they had been carved by fingernails and prayers, was this: "Because you looked long enough to remember what you tried to forget." My body went cold, my breath shallow. I knew exactly what it meant. I knew what memory it referred to. I had lived here before, not in this apartment, in this place, a long time ago, as a child. This wasn't my first lease. It was a return I had painted over, like a lie I wasn't ready to tell myself. And now, I was home, not by address, by fate. The wall exhaled one word more, 22 minutes, and I collapsed to my knees, staring at the half-finished message that I knew, somehow, would end with my name. 21 minutes. That's what the wall whispered next, but the number didn't count time in seconds. It measured identity. How many fragments of myself were left before I became part of the message entirely? I sat on the floor, surrounded by flakes of truth and regret, each one curling like a sentence unfinished. The room had grown impossibly quiet, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the kind of silence that comes just before something irreversible. The same quiet that lives in the lungs of a building seconds before it collapses. The mural on the wall had expanded, consuming nearly every inch of surface. It now showed a house, this house, but infinite. Room after room, spiraling into darkness, each one containing someone watching their walls, staring too long, asking questions, each one peeling, each one listening. And somewhere deep in the center, the mural showed a room where no one lived, yet the wall still wept messages no one would ever read. "You're not just a wall," I said quietly. "You're memory." The plaster cracked gently, approvingly. Another strip dropped from the far corner and floated across the room, landing on my lap like a sacred decree. It read, "I am what you ignore." I traced the letters with my finger. Then, "Why show yourself now?" The floorboards beneath me pulsed once, subtle, like a heartbeat, like a warning. The wall responded, "Because you're finally empty enough to receive me." My throat tightened. That's what all this was. It had waited until I was hollow. Until I had no distractions left, no calls to make, no people to disappoint, no noise to shield me from myself. Only then did the wall begin to speak, and I, fool that I was, stared long enough to hear it. The mirror beside the hallway cracked in half, not from heat or pressure, but from knowledge. My reflection was now divided, showing two versions of me, the one who painted everything over, and the one who peeled it all back. They stared at each other, judging, daring, recognizing. The wall laughed again, a soft, dusty sound. It peeled another strip from the space directly behind the TV. As the paint curled away, a new sentence was revealed. "You made me invisible. I made you visible." I swallowed hard, my vision blurred, not from tears, from memory. I remembered standing here years ago, small, afraid, hearing my parents argue in the next room, whispering to the wall because it was the only thing that never yelled back. I remembered scratching little messages into the corner baseboard. They were still there, beneath the new paint, beneath the lies. "You knew me then," I said. "You kept them." The wall shuddered, sending a fine mist of paint dust into the air. It formed shapes as it floated. Letters, my initials, drawings I had made when I was 6, a stick figure with no mouth, a house with no doors. The wall had stored them like organs, protected beneath coats of adulthood and decor. "Why me?" I asked. "Why choose me now?" The light bulb above hummed, then exploded softly, sprinkling down glass that bounced before evaporating midair. The wall peeled another section. Just one word this time: familiar. The wall hadn't just seen me, it had waited for me. I stood, legs trembling, and walked slowly toward the largest section of plaster. I placed my hand flat against it. It was warm, wet, alive. Beneath my palm, I felt a pulse, a slow, steady beat, not unlike my own. And then I realized I wasn't just reading the message. I was part of it now. The flakes that had landed on me had melted into my skin. The dust had entered my lungs. The symbols now burned behind my eyes every time I blinked. "What are you trying to say?" I whispered. "What's the final message?" The wall didn't answer in words. Instead, the plaster in front of me cracked and opened. Not into another room, but into myself. Inside the cavity was my childhood bedroom, the original one. The yellow walls, the peeling dinosaur stickers, the drawing of a door with no knob. I stepped forward, breath shallow. "This isn't possible. You covered this up," the wall wrote behind me. "But you never left." I walked inside. Everything was where I'd left it 30 years ago. The books, the shoebox of rocks I thought were crystals. The unfinished letter I wrote to someone I had forgotten existed. On the bed sat a roll of wallpaper. My wallpaper. I unrolled it, written across the inside in black ink. "When the paint starts to peel, don't look away." "What happens if I do?" I asked. The room began to vibrate. My vision warped. The wall outside whispered, "Then you'll start again." I turned around. The doorway was gone. I was back in the main room. The mural now showed me, standing in the center, staring at the wall, again, and the newest message forming, word by painful word. 17 minutes remain. My reflection was gone. My name was gone. The only thing left was the message I was slowly becoming. 16 minutes. The number wasn't just a countdown, it was a diagnosis. The wall had me now, not physically, not like vines or chains, but the way a riddle holds onto the brain long after the answer has been forgotten. My name no longer mattered. It hadn't been written in this room for years. What mattered now was the sentence, the one I was finishing, the one I had been living into, word by word, since the first coat dried. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by shed layers, like a snake made of choices and convenience. The mural had expanded again. My image was no longer alone. There were others now, men and women, children, elderly, even a dog, each of them mid-stare, locked in confrontation with their own walls. Some screamed, some scratched. One just laughed until the paint peeled off his teeth. The room pulsed with awareness. It knew I knew, and it was ready to end me with it. A new section of paint flaked from the floorboards and floated upward in reverse, spelling a word mid-ascent. Accept. Accept what? I asked. The air around the question shivered. A reply etched itself into the center of the floor. Deep, splintering. Yourself. The lights flickered. No, more than that. They reversed. The glow sucked inward, folding into the bulbs like a breath held too long. I blinked and found myself standing in a room made entirely of unfinished thoughts. Every object I had once owned was here, but translucent, flickering. The couch I almost bought, the books I never finished, the photo frame I left face down for years, all of them whispering, all of them saying the same thing in different accents. You painted us out? I turned to the wall. It was smooth again. The peeling had stopped. For a moment, I felt relief, a brief inhale of calm. Then the wall split down the middle, not cracked, not shattered, but split, like it was opening its mouth to speak a final time. Inside the seam, light bled out, a light that pulsed in letters. Words formed, not carved or drawn, but assembled from radiance itself. Every layer you add is a lie you'll have to live in. I stepped closer. My feet were no longer my own. They dragged themselves with the weight of recognition. I looked into the wall's opening and saw a room like mine, almost. But this one was perfect. The paint unpeeled, the furniture symmetrical, the ceiling untouched, a sanctuary of balance. I wanted to walk into it. My hand reached out. You can't live inside denial. The light warned, you can visit, but you'll never belong. Then where do I belong? I asked, the question falling from my mouth like plaster dust. The answer came on a wave of heat. Every wall in the room began to pulse, like a collective heartbeat rising to climax. And then they all spoke, together. Every surface, every corner, every atom of forgotten drywall. You belong in the truth. With those words, the layers began to reverse. The mural retracted. The flakes lifted from the floor and returned to the wall, reattaching like regrets reabsorbed. Messages unformed themselves. Letters climbed backward into sentences and vanished. The mural of my face faded into smooth beige. The only thing that remained was the sentence I had seen form moments before. 17 minutes remain. It hadn't changed. Time hadn't moved. The illusion of progress was just that, an illusion. You never let me go, I said. You held me in this loop. No, the wall whispered gently, almost lovingly. You never left. The furniture returned, slowly, groaning with the weight of false memory. My couch, my lamp, my books, all reassembled but slightly off. Each object wrong in a small, deliberate way. The lampshade had teeth. The bookshelf was made of ribs. The clock ticked counterclockwise in Morse code. I understood the pattern. The wall wasn't a prison. It was a teacher, and the lesson was repetition. Every tenant before me, I said aloud, they chose not to remember. The wall answered by peeling one final word, again. I fell to my knees. My hands pressed against the floor and sank half an inch into the hardwood. It wasn't solid anymore. None of it was. This apartment was a story I kept telling myself. And the wall was the edit I kept undoing. What happens when the message finishes? I asked. The air held still. Then one last sentence formed, in a perfect line across the top of the main wall, so crisp it could have been machine cut. When the wall stops peeling, you will understand what you've always been. I stood, my hands trembling, my breath short. 14 minutes remained. The paint slowed its descent. The truth was almost written, and I was almost translated. 13 minutes. That was all that remained, though by now time had become elastic, bending and snapping against the drywall like a taut rubber band soaked in memory. The room was silent, not the peaceful silence of stillness, but the kind that hovers after a scream so loud it breaks the air permanently. The wall had almost finished writing me. There were only a few flakes left to fall, curling delicately at the edges of my vision like the last pages of a journal written by someone who didn't survive the ending. I stood in front of the wall now. It was calm, too calm, smooth and matte again. But beneath that stillness, I could feel it vibrating, like a secret waiting to be translated into skin. The last message revealed itself, not in words, but in shape. The entire surface began to morph gently, bulging outward into an outline I recognized immediately. It was me, my silhouette, my posture, arms slightly lifted, one foot crooked from the years I'd unconsciously leaned to one side. The wall had watched everything, not just since I moved in, but before, since childhood, since I whispered my fears to it through crayon and drywall. I approached the outline, reached out, and placed my hand where its hand should have been. A warmth spread through the wall, a pulse. I heard it in the floor, in the ceiling, in my bones. Then a final line carved itself across the center of my chest, not into my skin, but into the space in front of me. A sentence written in air. When you stop covering, you become. Become what? I whispered. The wall responded with a breath, not a word, a breath. And I understood. I was not the reader. I was the subject. I wasn't decoding the message. I was the message. Every denial I painted over, every truth I avoided, every story I told myself to stay sane, all of it had layered over the original version of me. And now, those layers were gone. I stood bare before the wall, unprimed, unfinished, ready. The room darkened, not in light, but in clarity. Shadows thickened along the baseboards. The ceiling dripped silence. And then the final flakes began to fall. Slow, heavy, like snow made of regret. I didn't move. I let them cover me, one by one, each with a message. You remembered. You returned. You're next. The last one landed on my eyelid. It read, "Thank you." And then everything stopped. No more peeling, no more words. The wall went still, smooth, flat. It looked like nothing had ever happened, like I had simply repainted the place and forgotten the primer. But I knew better. I turned to the door. It was back, perfectly intact, doorknob gleaming like it had never disappeared. I walked to it, unsure what waited on the other side. I reached for the knob, but just before I touched it, I turned back. One last glance at the wall. A single word appeared, slow, trembling, hesitant. Stay? And I felt it, that impossible longing, the comfort of being known, of being remembered, of being seen by something older than memory and more honest than mirrors. I can't, I said, but I'll never forget. The wall didn't reply. It didn't need to. It simply faded into stillness, satisfied. I opened the door. Blinding light, warm, familiar. Not heaven, not escape, continuation. As I stepped through, I felt lighter, not like floating, like forgiveness. And behind me, the door closed gently, not with a slam, with a whisper. I am still me, but I am not the same. I see walls differently now. I wonder what they're hiding, or revealing. I wonder what we've buried beneath our need to make things look nice. Paint is easy, healing is hard. But underneath it all, there is truth. And somewhere, in another room, the paint begins to curl.